All right, there we go. So let's talk about socio-emotional development, cognitive development as well, in middle and late childhood. A lot of what we'll talk about at the end of the class today is socio-emotional learning, though. That's why I was confused. All right, so today we'll probably get through about this section, and then on Thursday we'll get through this section. So let's talk about emotions in middle and late childhood. Hopefully, as we do this, you're remembering the emotions that we talked about and the development of emotions, self, personality before this, but I'll kind of point to some of those things. So let's start with the understanding of self. In, again, middle to late childhood, we're talking about anywhere from like 6 to 12 or 13. It might be a little shorter than that. Adolescence might, for some researchers, begins at like 11. But think about first couple years of school. So, self-understanding. This is building on the capacities that infants and early children have. So we talked about from the very beginning that it takes a little while for us to be clear that infants understand that they are a separate being from their parent, the immediate caregiver that's usually feeding them, that kind of thing. And it's not till closer to 2 that they're able to successfully do the mirror test and really realize that they do have a sense of self, that they're a different person, a different self than other people. Then we're still building and growing, that they have these understandings that there's concrete differences between them in early childhood. So this child's hair is brown versus their friend's hair might be black or blonde or purple. So they see these concrete characteristics. But here in middle and then especially into late childhood, they're getting a lot better at identifying psychological traits and including that in their understanding of themselves. So they might see themselves more as helpful or popular, smart or nice. These kinds of traits are going to be a lot more common to see them as. It will be more common to see a child describe themselves this way in middle and then late childhood. So there's a lot more social comparison happening, and that's for a lot of different reasons. Part of that is the neurological development that they have, that they're now able to think abstractly, take someone else's perspective around this time. So with this imagining yourself in someone else's shoes is really important for social and peer relationships. So we'll talk about this in the context of families and peers specifically next time, but we'll talk about it here now too. It really helps you understand other people's thoughts and feelings. So it's not until around this time that children get really good at understanding what it is that other people are feeling and then pinpointing where that's coming from. It's not till middle and late childhood that they're really able to pinpoint well and accurately and consistently where their emotions are coming from as well. So with this, if you have peers that are fighting about something, maybe everybody wants to play with a specific toy or a specific game, but you can't all play with that at the same time. Maybe everybody wants the green Nerf gun and nobody wants the blue and red Nerf guns or something like that. Being able to understand other people's thoughts and feelings in any given context makes those peer interactions a lot easier. So it makes it possible or more possible to have more compassion and understanding and sharing between each other and compromising on things at this time into middle and late childhood. So self-esteem is one of the big things that we'll talk about here. We'll talk about self-esteem, self-concept, and self-efficacy. So those three things are sometimes used interchangeably just by people who are not doing the research in it, but they have pretty specific definitions. So let's talk about those definitions and then also how they're related to one another. So self-esteem, like I said, oftentimes you might hear a parent or a teacher talk about the self-esteem of a student. So what they're saying might be more related to self-esteem, it might be a little bit self-concept, it might be self-efficacy. But as researchers talk about these, they're distinct things that are related to each other, but they're separate. So self-esteem is this global evaluation of the self. So as an example, I like myself or I'm happy with who I am. So this general either positive or negative view of self. So, and again, it's really general evaluations versus self-concept is domain-specific evaluations of the self. So how are you in specific kind of areas? So I'm a good student. but I'm not a good athlete. I'm of average appearance. Those are domains that you might have a concept about. And this is really starting to appear in middle, and then definitely it is there in late childhood. So being able to say, hey, I'm really good at doing soccer, or I'm really good at doing math. I'm really good at um, this specific domain, but I'm not really good at doing X, Y, or Z. So that is, especially with the increase in social comparison, being able to see that is a lot better at this point. It's something that we see developing. So again, self-esteem is this overall general positive or negative view of self. So generally, do you like yourself? Do you not like yourself? Self-concept is my concept of myself as a student is positive, or my concept of myself as an athlete is negative, that kind of thing. So this is both different, again, than self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a belief that a person can master a situation and produce any kind of outcomes. So if you think you can do well at math, or you think you can do well at learning to play the ukulele, or you think you can do well at dance, this is self-efficacy. And again, it's usually domain specific. You can have broader self-efficacy. So like generally, I think I can work hard and do well. Like that would be more of a general self-efficacy, but usually self-efficacy is also domain specific, but it doesn't have to be. Versus self-concept really is defined as those specific evaluations of yourself within those domains, and self-esteem is the overall general perception of self. So again, self-efficacy, do you think that you're capable of acting in a situation? Do you think you're capable of handling a situation? So a general statement for this would be something like, I think I can. Versus maybe a more domain-specific aspect of self-efficacy, you might hopefully, all of you students are saying, I know I'll be able to do well on this week's exam. So I'm trying to help build your self-efficacy, give you study guides, see that you can accomplish things to build that self-efficacy. I know I can learn this new dance. So self-efficacy is one of the biggest, most important things for changing self-esteem. Because you might see self-concept, let's say self-esteem and self-concept, just these two things right now. So self-concept is those domain-specific evaluations. Let's say you have 100 things that you're evaluating yourself on, 100 different domains. If 50 of those are rated positive and 50 of those are you're rating yourself negative, your self-esteem might not be as high as someone who has 70 out of 100 ranked positive for themselves, or 100 out of 100 ranked positively. So you can see how these are definitely correlated. They're related to one another. So that general sense of self is probably partially caused by some aspects of your domain-specific evaluations. So if you think you are a good student and you are a good athlete and you are attractive, all those things together might make it a little more likely that you'll have higher self-esteem. Similarly, these are all related as well to self-efficacy. If you think you can master situations, you're going to have higher self-esteem as well. There's actually a good causal relationship between self-efficacy and self-esteem. So other things that are related to self-esteem, self-concept, self-efficacy are attachment to parents. So when a child is securely attached to their parents, again, we're talking specifically about middle and late childhood here, even though I'm giving examples that go into early childhood and all the way to late adulthood. Secure attachment is correlated to higher self-esteem and higher self-concept. Abuse or neglect is related to lower self-esteem and self-concept. But one important thing, especially about self-esteem and self-concept, are they're very often inaccurate. So you can do a better job at assessing these with clear feedback from other people and getting a more clear picture. But your domain-specific evaluations of yourself in, say, math or science or dance or playing ukulele, they're often inaccurate. So if you took 5 students who are middle children or late children and they all had exactly the same, let's say, just talent level of playing the ukulele, let's say they're all pretty good. They're not great, but they're all pretty good. if they all had that same capacity, some of them would rank themselves in their self-concept as really, really great at ukulele. Some will rank themselves as really poor at playing ukulele. So our self-esteem and our self-concept are often pretty inaccurate. And this isn't good because we want people to have higher self-esteem. We want them to have higher self-concept. So how do we get them to have more clear pictures of themselves? Well, we give them good feedback. So as a teacher, as a parent, as a peer, giving really specific feedback like, oh, you did this well, you solved this kind of problem well, you have been practicing a lot, so you did this really great. Those kinds of specific feedback really help to change that self-concept, those domains. So understanding, oh, maybe I am good at this specific domain, and then that's then correlated with self-esteem. So poor self-esteem, well, I guess this is a good point to get at before then. A lot of research on self-esteem is correlational. So hopefully when I say that, this brings to mind the correlation causation, but they're not the same thing. So we've given examples of ice cream sales and violent crimes, both being correlated, but one is not causing the other. So a lot of self-esteem research is correlational. It's really hard to manipulate self-esteem. So like I said, it's this general overarching positive or negative view of self. So it's really hard in an experimental setting to give someone higher self-esteem. So it takes a little longer than that, right? So it's hard to manipulate self-esteem to see then what it changes. So a lot of this research is asking people, what is your self-esteem on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being really great, 0 being really poor, what's your self-esteem? And so then comparing that to their scores on other things. So most research on self-esteem is like that. So with that, longitudinal studies are done with self-esteem though, to watch when self-esteem changes or self-concept changes. And so that's some of the best ways we can get causal data on self-esteem. So this is something I don't think I was clear enough in my last class about this. So I really want to try and give some examples to be clear about these next two points that I'm making. So well, I guess the first question, what are things you think people around you could do to increase your self-esteem? So, or let's take middle and late children. What are things you think a teacher, a parent, a peer could do to increase the self-esteem of a young person? Let's start there. So whether it's in the chat box or just take over the mic. All right, we've got a comment. Hooray. Compliment. So compliment. Yeah, I can repeat the question for sure. So for a middle child, just without having gone over the slides, the next couple points, for a middle child, what are things you might expect could increase their self-esteem? So what are things that a parent, a peer, a teacher could do? What are things you think could increase their self-esteem? So we've got a couple comments here. We've got compliment, words of affirmation. What are some other ideas? Another question, I guess, adding on to this. So what are some things you think we could do to increase young middle children or late children's self-esteem? Also, do you think adding friends and support network or decreasing friends and support network would increase or decrease self-esteem? So which do you think would increase self-esteem more if you put more of a social support or took away social support? So someone with 4 people in their network versus 20 people in their network, which one do you think would have higher self-esteem? All right, we've got an answer. More people in their network. And these are things that we do generally expect, right? We expect that compliments or words of affirmation or having more people around them might lead to more self-esteem. So good, good. All right, so let's talk about what research has shown. And so most of this is coming from longitudinal research. Um, so this next comment Sierra makes, I think putting children in situations where they can succeed can raise their self-worth. So you're getting a little ahead of us. That's actually our next point, getting into self-efficacy. That raising self-efficacy will then raise self-esteem. So that's the next big point. But really good thoughts there. You're absolutely right. Um, but let's focus first just on the self-esteem rather than the self-efficacy. So in longitudinal studies, we see that it tends to be that people who are changing what is happening is people's self-esteem changes before their social network changes. So their self-esteem goes up or goes down, and then after that, their social network increases or decreases. So it's not actually that they're getting more of a network and then their social esteem increases, or their network is decreasing and their social esteem or their self-esteem. I might be mixing up a lot of words here. So it's the thing that's happening. A is self-esteem changes. B is network change. Usually we generally think that if, hey, the network changes, you lose support or you gain support, then maybe your self-esteem will change. That's not actually what happens. It's interesting. Also, things like additional words of affirmation and compliments, depending on what those compliments are. If they're like Sierra's comment, complimenting about specific domain-specific successes, or the trying hard in specific situations, that can then affect self-efficacy, which will then affect self-esteem. But just the positive words in general doesn't lead to self-esteem, which is interesting. So essentially what's happening is the people around a middle or late child, a teacher, parents, peers, notice a change in a child's self-esteem. They notice that they now seem to have higher self-esteem, or now they seem to have lower self-esteem, and then they change their behavior in response to that. So their behaviors don't change first and then lead to changes in self-esteem. First the self-esteem changes, and then the peers and context around them, then they change in response, which is really interesting. It might not be what you generally think of, but through longitudinal studies, we see that's the relationship. And that's why it's important to do things like longitudinal studies, because I would have generally thought that, hey, if you just add people to a network and they're all really positive and supportive, it's going to make someone's self-esteem go up. When in reality, that's not how it tends to happen. So low self-esteem is a pretty bad thing. It can lead to obesity, anxiety, depression, suicide, delinquency, and lower life satisfaction. So this is some of the negative consequences we can track with longitudinal studies. So this is both causal and correlational results here. So we want self-esteem to go up. How do we do it? And Sierra was really getting at this with the comment of putting children in situations where they can succeed. So achievement and gaining capacities is one of the very best things to increase self-esteem. So that is all around self-efficacy. So this is why I actually like to focus more on self-efficacy, and a lot of research now focuses more on self-efficacy than self-esteem. If you look at, let's say you did a search of Google Scholar or PsycInfo and limited the range of years from like the 60s to the 80s, and you search self-efficacy and self-esteem, you would find a lot more articles on self-esteem during that time, versus if you looked at, say, the 90s to now, you would find more articles on self-efficacy. So the field has realized essentially that self-efficacy is kind of the biggest piece of this puzzle, the most important, and one that we can actually manipulate pretty well, that we can do a pretty good job at increasing self-efficacy. And Sierra's comment is exactly what we need to be doing. Again, self-efficacy is that feeling that you can accomplish things, that you can do things, that you can solve problems, that you can manipulate outcomes yourself. and it's often domain specific. So it's a critical reason why students achieve. If a student doesn't feel like they can do well in math, they don't feel like they can learn their multiplication in, say, middle childhood, if they don't feel like they can learn division or do some algebra, then they're probably not going to try very hard, and then they're not going to do very well. So these things lead to then lower self-esteem. So if you increase self-efficacy, if you give young people, and this actually applies to adolescents, young adults, middle adults, late adults. If you give people things that they can achieve, they start seeing their achievements. If they're working hard and they make gains, their self-efficacy will rise. They will realize, oh, I can accomplish things in this domain. So again, usually self-efficacy is domain specific. So, oh, I am accomplishing learning to play the ukulele. I am accomplishing learning how to do multiplication tables. I am accomplishing learning how to play basketball well. So whatever domain it is, increasing that self-efficacy will then increase their self-concept within that domain and also increase their broader sense of self-esteem. So Sierra's comment, it was exactly right. Putting children in situations where they can succeed will then raise their self-esteem. So how do we do that? How do we work on self-efficacy? It grows when people feel like they're capable of acting and affecting situations. So we need to help scaffold them in that. So parents, teachers, mentors, peers, we can all scaffold middle and late children as they're building capacity in any area. So as a parent, I might look at the capacities that my children have. Let's take my daughter since she's in this age range. I can look at her capacities. One capacity that she has is riding her scooter. A capacity she doesn't really have yet is actually riding her bike. Statements that she's said to me make it clear that she doesn't have a lot of self-efficacy that she can learn how to ride a bike. It's a struggle for her. It's harder than it is to do riding a scooter. That's been a lot easier process. She's been able to see a lot of quicker gains there. And so she has a lot of self-efficacy in that she can learn to ride a scooter and then even do tricks. Versus on a bike, she's still on training wheels. And she doesn't want to practice. It's hard for her to do that. So as a parent, I can look at her capacities, and to build her self-esteem, I can choose any area. I can choose something that she's already good in that I know she'll excel quicker in, or I can choose something like the bike where she is struggling in. She can still build those gains. So as a teacher, as a parent, as a mentor, it's important to look at that person in their context and decide, well, if we're trying to overall build self-esteem, should we work on things that are maybe easier to work on, or maybe like 3 things that are easy and 1 thing that's harder? Because what we want to be showing a child is that with their hard work, they can learn and succeed and do well and achieve things on their own, or with support. So it's up to you to decide, like in whatever domain, are you going to focus on the things that they're struggling with? Because then as they get better, that self-efficacy will grow. Or are you going to have a mix of things that they're really good at already, or that you know they'll excel at quickly? So yeah, but the big key is that them seeing that they are building those capacities, that they're reaching milestones, that they're getting better, that them seeing that is going to be the biggest thing to affect self-efficacy. And that goes not just for middle children, it goes for adults as well. So if you wanted better self-esteem, work on building capacities that you have, whether it's something you struggle with or something that you know you can build that capacity quickly. It'll build your self-efficacy in that thing and build those domain-specific attributions of yourself, and then build your overall self-esteem. So it's a really useful thing that a lot of schools have realized and started better to work on. This is one reason there's a lot of recommendation to praise and encourage the process of doing things. So even if the math problem is wrong, or as an example, so even if the math problem is wrong, or they fall off the bike, or they got the wrong chord on the ukulele, praising the process that they're working harder and pointing out, so complimenting specific aspects of that hard work, that they're doing well, that they are accomplishing the work, that they are getting better, That is some of the best things to affect self-efficacy. So again, that goes for middle and late children all the way through late adulthood. So um, in a so for example, this is implemented in, say, nursing homes by teaching people new skills with, say, a computer or an iPad. So helping them build those capacities, their self-esteem goes up. They're overall more positive and happier about things. So building self-efficacy is one of those areas we can work on well, we can scaffold well. So it's actually a really good place to kind of intervene on to help people build their capacities. And it's really positive because, one, you're helping build capacities, and then all these other positive things flow after it. So it goes to that cascades or that positive upward spiral model that we've looked at. So with this being said, let's look at a cute example of this, of a child who has achieved something and how it is affecting their overall view of themselves.
What do you got? Any words of wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them? Give me some thumbs up. Subscribe.
So hopefully some of you have not seen that before, and you enjoyed it as well. I think it's always good to watch that one. So there you could hopefully pick out a couple statements. I know it's fun and funny, but hopefully you could also pick out some statements of where there's self-efficacy building there, leading to self-concept being increased, leading to overall self-esteem increasing as well. All right, so with this, at the same time that these capacities are growing in middle and late childhood, self-regulation is increasing as well. So kids have a lot better capacity to regulate their own emotion. And so let's talk about those emotions. So here, the understanding of emotions is improving. Part of this comes from they've now had 8 years, let's say, to be experiencing emotions. They see anger being used in ways that might not be helpful or useful in the situations. They might see anger being used in ways that are helpful in the situation or be regulated or irregulated. They'll see fear being used in ways that it tends to be useful or not useful. So they see the function of emotion, they see it playing out in different contexts, what the outcomes are. And so with that, with their learning, with their own experience of emotions, with going through social situation, trying things out, their understanding of their emotions improves a lot. And they have now this neurological capacity to take someone else's perspective, to put themselves in their shoes. And usually we talk about that in the sense of empathy, but it also lets them see how these emotions are all working. So mental time travel is also appearing at this time. So this is a capacity that you can help train earlier on, but this is on average when we see it appear. So it sounds a lot cooler. Mental time travel sounds a lot cooler than it is, but it is a useful skill socio-emotionally. This is the ability to look forward and predict how you might feel, or look to the past and remember the emotions that you had. So you might look forward and say, hey, it's my birthday coming up. Hey, it actually is my birthday coming up. That's funny. That's probably why this example came to my head. So a child might say, hey, it's my birthday coming up. If my best friend can come over for my birthday, I'll be happy. But if they're not able to come, I'm going to be disappointed. So that mental time travel, putting themselves in a situation that takes a lot of abstract thought and reasoning and understanding of emotion to do that, to have that capacity. And so it's not till middle and late childhood on average that we see this appear, that they've had the experience, they have the neurological capacity where that happens. Again, it can be worked on and trained to occur earlier, but just on average, this is when we see it occur. Similarly, understanding that more than one emotion can happen in a situation is becoming more clear into middle and late childhood. And a lot of that is just by experiencing different emotions. They see someone who's both excited as well as anxious, right? So seeing multiple emotions, seeing anger as well as sadness at the same time. So being able to experience these things, realizing that more than one emotion can happen at the same time. This is something we actually worked on specifically with even children as young as 5 in a clinical setting, trying to go around and ask them what their emotions were in any situation and give us more than one emotion if they had more than one, if it was clear to us that there was more than one emotion. So another way we would do this is we would go in the community with these children. Oftentimes I would take them to like a game store, one, because they like to go to the game store and look at the video games. There were like displays and they could play some of the video games. But with that, there were also other kids there that would be upset or angry or excited or worried, and some of these emotions all at the same time. So I could ask the client that I was working with, hey, look at that person. What emotions is that person feeling? So even earlier on in early childhood, you can work on this, understanding that more than one emotion can occur. But on average, just naturally, this is when we see it appearing. But it can be trained earlier as well. Hopefully that's clear. Yeah, so joyful and also anxious might be something that someone can experience. They're often more aware of their own internal emotional states and where that's coming from as well. So as an example of this, my youngest child broke one of their princess crowns the other day, and then they were really, really upset. And they weren't able to pinpoint that they were sad, like in our trying to talk to them about it as they were crying and freaking out. They weren't able to pinpoint that they were sad because of that. So it was clear to us, like watching the whole situation unfold, that all of a sudden that broke, and now they're really upset that was happening. And even for my older child, sometimes they struggle with this, with being able to pinpoint exactly what is causing their emotion. So being sad because your friend's not in school one day, or being excited that your birthday is tomorrow. It's funny that this example is here because I don't remember when I first wrote that example in here. It wasn't recently though. But children are getting better and better with experiencing emotions, at being able to pinpoint what that emotion is coming from. This can be challenging too if their emotions are different because of hormone level differences. So if they're neurodivergent, for example, or also if they're maybe hungry, they might not be able to pinpoint that's why, or that they woke up 2 hours early. They might not be able to pinpoint that as well. But it's getting better through middle and into late childhood. Also, suppression and concealment of emotions improves, and this is really important for a lot of social situations. So let's say you have a friend, you're in middle childhood. Every time I say middle child, I think of like the second of 3 born, when really what I'm trying to say is like in that middle childhood age, so around like 8 years old or so. So the suppression and concealment of emotions is improving. If you take a group of 8-year-olds and one has said something mean about the other ones, it might not be beneficial for the social environment to be really mad and angry at that person outwardly. You might be really mad, but maybe you're waiting to see if they'll apologize. Maybe you're displaying a little bit of anger, but not as much as you're feeling. It can help to concealing and suppressing our emotions is something we do a lot that we might not realize, that can make social situations run smoother. And so children are learning to do that. So a toy gets stolen, they might be really mad when they're 3 and yell and scream and throw a tantrum or try to hit someone. By say age 9, if that same kind of thing happens, their favorite toy or maybe their cell phone gets taken away, they can suppress that and try to deal with that. Not necessarily regulating emotion, but that is the next slide. But the suppression to allow social situations to work out better is getting better. So masking anger in social situations is probably one of the most common. If you're really, really excited, you might also like keep that down to make social situations run smoothly or not become like the center of attention or something. There's a lot of reasons you might conceal emotions or suppress them from being displayed as you would. And it does help social interactions a lot. So with this, self-regulation is improving as well. So whether that's a stress reduction technique, anger management technique, redirecting your feelings, this is all improving as well. And this is, again, one of those things that can be trained earlier and is really important to be trained at this time. So they're able now, hopefully you can see from our discussion of infants and say crying it out, at that time in life, an infant is not able to soothe themselves. They need that outside support to help their bodies calm down. Even in early childhood, having really quick responsive parenting. Hopefully you can think of those attachment videos that we showed. When the parent was coming in, when a child was upset, in the secure attachment, the parent like patted the child's back, was talking to the child, helped the child calm down, then got the child reinterested in toys. So that kind of responsiveness, giving the child what they need, teaches the child's body as they're experiencing emotion, as their body learns, and neurologically as well. When I'm saying body, I'm also meaning neurons as well as hormone levels. Teaches them what they should do to then feel more calm. So at this time into middle and late childhood, children are starting to get that capacity where they can actually now soothe themselves. So it wasn't a capacity that they had earlier on, both neurologically and biologically. I mean, neurologically is biologically, but yeah, sorry. Now they have this capacity, or they're building that into late adulthood. So by the end of late adulthood or late childhood, they should be fairly good at this. So also, we've talked about empathy a lot. I won't go into detail on it now. They do now have the genuine capacity for full empathy, taking someone else's perspective as well as feeling what they're feeling, knowing where that feeling is coming from, pinpoint to why their friend feels that way, those kinds of things. All the aspects of empathy towards late childhood are all coming together. All right, so this is related to socio-emotional learning. So a lot of schools try to specifically teach socio-emotional skills. So let's actually take a quick break and then we'll come back and watch this video and talk about socio-emotional learning. So let's be back at 10:46. And then we'll watch this video and learn a little bit about specifically how you can train some of these skills in early, middle, and late childhood. So quick break, be back at 10:46. All right, and we are back. Hopefully you are able to get a snack or use the restroom. And let's start by watching this video on socio-emotional learning. So basically, socio-emotional learning is one way we describe how we teach kids a lot of these emotion regulation and cognitive skills that they need in life. So let's watch this little summary video.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work, and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships.
So I'm going to pause right there. While it said back when the little paperclip dude was bouncing the ball back and forth, while it said that socio-emotional learning is for elementary school through high school, that is where most of the research on socio-emotional learning comes from. But there are also socio-emotional learning skills to develop in college settings, university settings, as well as businesses have run socio-emotional courses, socio-emotional learning courses. Just the majority of the research, because methodologically, it's easier to access public school kids. So public school goes from elementary through high school. So that's an easier population to access. You can more easily talk to one big public school and get a big sample of students versus multiple small private schools and get all their students. So it's just an easier environment to kind of control some of the variables with. So that's why a lot of the research also, especially in lower income schools, as a researcher, you might come in and say, hey, if you let me come in and try out my new program on your schools, on your kids, I'll give you X amount of money, basically because we have that in this grant that we can give you. So that's another reason that a lot of this research is done from elementary school through high school, and a lot of the programs are focused on public school. But there are still programs focused on, say, homeschool kids, on what families can do themselves, all the way from early childhood all the way through. There's not much past college age students, and it really does drop off after high school. But there are programs that even companies run with their employees to build these things like managing emotions, having empathy, solving problems, making responsible decisions, and maintaining healthy relationships, because that helps to have a healthy work environment. That helps to have more ethical workers as well. So so yes, it does go beyond just high school, but that is where most of the research comes from because it's an easier population to access. So these are the key pieces of what socio-emotional learning tries to do, is those 5 things.
Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults. When students learn to make responsible decisions about their lives and their future, things can turn out better. Research shows social emotional learning makes a difference. Students who participate in SEL do better academically, have improved attitudes and behaviors, and act in delinquent or disruptive ways less often. In the United States, students with strong social emotional competence are twice as likely to earn a college degree and nearly 50% more likely to graduate from high school and have a full-time job by age 25. Just as important, students who are socially and emotionally competent have more friends. This means they're more likely to feel connected to school and do well, and less likely to be left out or bullied. Simply put, by participating in social emotional learning, students learn the skills to succeed in every facet of school and the rest of their lives.
So did get a little bit as to why these skills are important even after school. Um, yeah, essentially emotional skills that we have are important for every aspect of our life. For managing relationships, basically no matter what we're doing, we're interacting with people. Even though you're all on the other side of a computer screen, for me, we're interacting right now, right? So, or if you're in a job, you're interacting with people. So yeah, these are important skills. So when we're talking about elementary school students and middle childhood and then into middle school for late childhood, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills look a little different for every age group. So it should be age appropriate to the group. So if you're talking about a first grader, relationship skills of being friends, social awareness, what is everybody feeling around here? Responsible decision making, so making sure you're following directions in the class, self-awareness, what are your behaviors doing for people around you or your emotions, managing yourself, going to the bathroom when it's time for a first grader. That's a lot different than, say, someone in 6th or 7th grade. So their relationship skills might now be including even dating. Definitely if we're talking about, say, a junior in high school, it's probably going to be including dating. Responsible decision making in high school is probably centered around even responsible decisions about money and time and driving or college, as well as responsible decision making about sexual behaviors. So these all are skills that are built over time. And so that's one thing, is it's really good for, say, in a public school setting, when you have kind of control over the kind of curriculums that you get from elementary all the way through high school, you can more easily build on those things. But even in a setting where there's, say, a private school that just does like the junior senior year kind of thing, so get them off into college quicker or at a better place, they can still have socio-emotional learning skills, just taught to that age range. That's kind of a big key here. But those core components are all the same, still self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills, just taught to the specific age group that you're talking about. So there are a lot of programs for socio-emotional learning. Not all of them are good. With that being said, sometimes they're combined with character education programs. So you, at your level, you can probably use character education and socio-emotional learning interchangeably, because oftentimes the kind of actual programming and activities that they do really come down to the same things, even though one might have a focus in building certain characteristics versus this is more emotion focused. Oftentimes they're very similar. But this place, CASEL, it's an acronym, they're a really good place to find research on socio-emotional learning. So as well as designing and running their own programs, they also have researchers who collect research on other socio-emotional learning programs. So as an example, I've mentioned the purpose activities that I've built with colleagues. Essentially, it's one aspect of socio-emotional learning. It's aimed at adolescents and early adults to help people find purpose in life, and we'll talk more in detail as we get to that age range. But that's an example of a socio-emotional learning tool that people can use. So CASEL, their researchers, might go and find my paper and then incorporate it into their research and their recommendations. But it's a good place to go for some of this information. This could be relevant to you if you want to be a teacher, if you are a parent, if you want to see what your school district is doing, what's kind of socio-emotional learning your school district is doing, or the private school, or if you want to do something in a homeschool setting. You can find a lot of information here on CASEL. So the acronym for CASEL, I just looked it up like an hour and a half ago when I was sharing this with the other class. Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So they have their own researchers, that do programs, run programs, as well as they collect information from other researchers on socio-emotional learning. So they have policy recommendations at the federal and state level. They have research that you can click on the current research, and this is written in a way that should be accessible to pretty much most people. If you don't have as high of literacy, it might be, some of it might be a little inaccessible. So I do think they could do a better job. I feel like in previous years it has been written at a lower reading level essentially, but it is better than what you might find in a peer-reviewed research article. But you can also link to some of their research, so here, some citations if you want to look up more details. But this would be a good place to go if socio-emotional learning was something of interest to you for a question paper, or if it was going to be relevant to you in life generally. So, yeah, good source. They have some documents and papers and research summaries of which specific programs have kind of failed and which specific programs are really good and for what ages they're good for and for what kind of context. Usually, again, it's mostly focused on like elementary through high school public school settings, but they do talk about programs for after high school, like in a college setting, as well as things for like homeschool or private schools that they could do as well. So hopefully a good resource that'll be useful to you. All right, so let's talk specifically about stress. So stress is also one aspect of socio-emotional learning, but children are doing a lot better job at this middle-late childhood time at being able to recognize and pinpoint where their stresses are coming from, and they have more of a capacity to cope with it, to be able to regulate themselves. So it is really important in middle and late childhood to be teaching children coping strategies for stress and anxiety. We'll watch a little video that gives a couple recommendations, but things that we've already talked about in the class. Meditation can be helpful. Exercise can be really helpful. There's a lot of different things we can do to train kids to handle their anxiety better. Obviously, you can train these skills earlier on. We would do that a lot in the clinical setting. So these can be trained earlier on. But kids have the capacity in middle and late childhood to really grasp these abilities and these coping strategies. So let's watch another little video about resilience and stress and anxiety in kids.
Today I'm going to be talking about the topic of toxic stress in our children. And we all know that kids undergo a lot of different types of stress, anything from taking a big test, moving, to things more serious like parents getting divorced or having a serious injury. So how do we help kids deal with that stress? Stress can actually be positive. It can actually motivate kids, for example, to study harder for that test. But it can also have really negative repercussions too. It can lead to kids becoming depressed, even suicidal in the worst cases. It can lead to kids not taking good care of their bodies or making the wrong types of choices, like abusing drugs or alcohol. And we obviously don't want to get to that point. So if we see our kids starting to get stressed, one of the big things we can do is promote what's called resilience. Resilience is how kids deal with that stress. And there are a lot of different ways that we can promote resilience in our kids. One of them is just by having supportive, positive adults in their lives. So parents, teachers, relatives, friends, really talking to kids, validating their feelings, and just being a support person. The more support people that kids have in their lives has been shown to help reduce that toxic stress and the bad side effects from it. If you think that your kid is needing some additional help, having a professional to talk to can also be of assistance, such as a psychologist like we have here at Children's, social worker, school counselor. Those can also help build up that resilience in kids. Also promoting positive, healthy activities in kids, such as sports, extracurricular activities, or just getting outside. All of those can promote resilience, which can help combat the toxic stress.
So resilience is a really popular term now, and I've even seen lay people, so just like friends on social media, mentioning resilience. So if you look at research, resilience has been an area that's gotten a lot more research in, say, the last 15 years. So resilience is kind of this umbrella term for the capacity to be able to bounce back after some challenge or something hard, some kind of stress, anxiety, debilitating illness, things like that. So when we're in this situation of a pandemic and lots of stresses and anxieties, a lot more people are realizing, just normal everyday people is what I'm meaning, that resilience is really relevant. So building resilience. So what are ways to build resilience? If you're trying to help someone's resilience go up, you're not actually going to be working on resilience itself. You're going to be working on techniques and tools. You'll be adding to a network for someone. So giving someone a therapist, connecting them with other people in their family, that can build resilience. And teaching coping strategies, that can build resilience. Going to a therapist and learning new techniques and tools for reducing stress, that can build resilience. So meditating, adding meditation to your day-to-day life, even for middle and late children, can help build resilience. So all these are different pieces that can help in your ability to bounce back from stressful or hard things. So that's what resilience is really that ability to bounce back. And it's made up of a lot of different things. There's contextual factors as well as individual factors that can lead a person to be more resilient. Even genetic tendency can lead someone to be more or less resilient to certain situations. So when you're working on these skills to reduce stress, activity, children should be having at this time in life at least an hour of pretty rigorous physical activity a day. That in and of itself will improve resilience. They're playing team sports, they're building their network and having other people around them. They're able to see their friends, things like that. So I've also seen papers recently coming out about like the social support of this kind of web kind of calls for different age groups. I don't think I've seen anything come out for middle and late childhood. I have seen some papers come out for adolescents. I do wonder if there is research on continuing relationships when you're socially distanced through like Zoom kind of conferencing for middle and late children. That's interesting. That's something that I would be interested in. If you are too, do a question paper on it. See if it exists, or if all you can find is stuff for adolescents and adults. That's useful too. Your result might be, so basically I could only find stuff for adolescents and adults, so we should try to check this out for early childhood or middle childhood or late childhood. All right, so a lot of things in moral development we've talked about at different times. I want to make it clear today that moral development is multifaceted, it's multidimensional. So Kohlberg's theory of moral development focused exclusively on moral reasoning. So when you're faced with a moral dilemma, where can you reason at it? At middle childhood, Kohlberg thought we would be about in between step 3 and 4 here. So we've seen in neural development and social development that children have gone from being focused on rules and punishments to being kind of self-focused, not in like a selfish way, but that cognitively that's their focus is self, and getting reinforced rewards or not, conforming into middle childhood and getting social approval. And then step 4, Kohlberg thought, was conforming to kind of laws or authority. So interesting, we do see about step 1, 2, and 3 kind of following along with the neurological and cognitive development that young people have. But after that point, after we get past step 3, steps 4, 5, and 6 are essentially abstract thought. As long as you've got that, you can reason at level 6 or level 5 or level 4. So interestingly, one thing that we see from Kohlberg is Kohlberg thought that you had to go through those steps, that was what you did. And we do really see a pretty good alignment with steps 1, 2, and 3. They do happen earlier than Kohlberg thought, though. But after that, after step 3, people can morally reason if you're presented with a moral dilemma. If you've ever heard the example of Heinz. Heinz's wife, it has a really bad illness. There's one doctor that has a prescription for the illness. Heinz can't afford it. Is Heinz justified in taking that medicine for the wife? I might have missed a couple components of that moral dilemma just based on memory, but that's kind of the thing. So, well, where's your reasoning? Where's your moral reasoning? Are you conforming to laws, or is the principle of conscience more important? So that's what moral reasoning is actually thinking about processing what is the right or wrong thing to do in this situation. So Kohlberg thought it was very step-like and stage-like, and the way it was written, he didn't explicitly say like level 6 moral reasoning is the best, but a lot of people have taken it that way, and it seems like maybe Kohlberg thought that too. But interestingly, we find that people who are moral exemplars, that their neighbors, their church, their people in their community rate as like the most moral people they know, are really actually more often reasoning at levels 4 or 5, or sometimes 6, but most often at level 4. So the people that we hold up as moral exemplars can use any of these reasonings, but oftentimes are reasoning at level 4. So moral reasoning is one aspect of moral development, one dimension. We see that Kohlberg's theory had some problems. He ignored actual moral behavior and moral values, emotions. It was all about that reasoning. So we've talked about moral emotions. We've specifically mentioned guilt and empathy, so I won't go into detail here. But moral emotions are something that children are learning and experiencing, seeing situations, experiencing things that maybe they feel are fair or not fair, make them sad or feel guilty or happy, or they're feeling empathy. So as this happens, they're building moral values. So based on their own experience through life, children in middle and late childhood will have their own moral values, their beliefs or attitudes towards the way things should be. So in X or Y situation, should we share, should we not share? As an example, maybe a child in middle childhood's moral values say that you shouldn't cheat. In a setting when a friend in class asks them for an answer, they don't tell them the answer. Versus another friend's moral values might be, we should help people all the time. And so their friend asks them for an answer even during a test, and they give it to them. They share that answer. They're trying to help. So those moral values might lead to 2 different kinds of behaviors from these 2 children. So that's what we're talking about, beliefs and attitudes about the way things should be. So that is another dimension. We've got moral reasoning, we've got moral emotions, we've got moral values, and all these are building up together as someone is developing. So, and it's different within different contexts. In one context, values might be such and such, versus another context, they might be such and such. So we talked about moral reasoning. Another aspect that we won't get into too much today is moral identity. We'll talk about that more when we talk about identity in adolescent development. Because one example of an identity people can have is as a moral person. So Superman sees themselves as a moral person. That's really important to them. It's very central to who they see themselves as. So people can have a moral identity. You don't have to have a moral identity to be a moral person, but it's one thing a moral person might have is a moral identity. So we'll ignore this till we talk about moral identity later. Moral character is another dimension of moral development. So we've now got moral reasoning, moral emotion, moral values, moral identity, and now moral character is kind of the personality traits of morality. So the enduring ways or the tendency to behave in certain ways. So some examples might help this be more clear. So you might say someone is an honest person. You might say someone is a respectful person, or someone's a loyal person, or someone's a kind person. These are examples of moral characteristics, so kind of the personality traits around morality or moral behavior. So last of all, moral behavior itself. Usually when we're talking about moral behavior, we're talking about anything pro-social, so pro-society, pro-others. So sharing is pro-social, it brings people together, it's helpful for society. Holding the door for a person coming behind you, that's pro-social, it helps that person, those kinds of things. So what are some other examples of prosocial behavior specifically that we might see in middle and late childhood? So in like the elementary school years or beginning of middle school years. What are some examples of prosocial behavior that might actually occur in real life? Yeah, that's a really great example. So we've got one inviting someone to play with them. So you might have, it could be just one-on-one, or it could be like there's a group, and then they invite one other kid to come and play with them, or it might be one person sees another person playing and one of them invites. So yeah, that's exactly pro-society, pro-other behavior. That's pro-social behavior. Good. Any other examples of pro-social behavior you might see at the middle to late childhood level? Yeah, definitely sharing. Sharing is one that you'll probably see earlier too, as well, but definitely can still see that um, all throughout lifespan, really. So those are some good, clear examples. And so when we're talking about moral behavior as researchers, that's generally what we're talking about, things that are pro-social. There is some difference between those constructs, um, but at this level, that's basically some of your first or second psych classes. Let's not get into the weeds of the distinctions between um, the researchers who don't say they're exactly the same thing. Um, so with this being said, though, these kinds of behaviors, inviting someone to play with them, sharing other moral behaviors or pro-social behaviors, to say develop the same way as other behaviors. So there's nothing like mystical or unusual. So behaviorism, so you can reinforce behaviors, you can encourage sharing behaviors, you can encourage other pro-social behaviors. Social-cognitive, so you can model pro-social behavior as an adult or a teacher or a peer. You can be a model of pro-social behavior, behavior that's helpful to others. You can help scaffold this using the zone of proximal development. If a child sees their parents being consistently helpful or volunteering, for example, you can it's less likely that a child in middle childhood or late childhood will be volunteering on their own, but they might see the consistency of maybe their parents volunteering or something like that. Also, bioecological systems, the context affects these things. So what is available in your environment? So in your school, what is the kind of climate or culture around bullying is one specific example. So even though bullying might not be allowed, do the bullies never get punished? Do the bullies actually get more social hierarchy? Do the teachers kind of avoid those bullies? If that's the case, then that child is learning in that context that bullying can be adaptive or beneficial, versus if it's not allowed and bullies are maybe not necessarily punished, but if they are taught differently, or there's other supports, if there's more supports for the bully victims, that might give you other ideas about prosocial behavior, how society should work. So these are how children are learning these prosocial behaviors, just the same way we learn other behaviors too, by living and experiencing them. So on average, prosocial behavior is increasing throughout childhood and through adolescence. With this, focusing on sharing, talking about what other people need and are feeling is really good, and then having opportunities in the classroom and the community for prosocial behavior are really good. So some ways that you can talk about what other people need are through books or media. So one example is let's say you're watching Fox and the Hound. If no one's ever seen that movie, maybe it doesn't make sense, but basically there's a fox, a baby fox, and a puppy that become friends. But then as they grow up, the hound is raised to hunt foxes. And so you can talk about that moral dilemma. You can do some of that moral reasoning. What should they do? What's appropriate? How can they be pro-social and things like that? What should be the outcome? You can pause a movie and talk about that. You can talk about that as you read a book. You can buy books specifically for that, just like we've talked about buying books specifically for specific language skills or things like that. I'm actually pleasantly surprised how many times we can have moral development related conversations when reading Calvin and Hobbes. It's It's really great. It's funny how much of my moral values seem to maybe have come from me reading Calvin and Hobbes as a child too. So just a funny little connection there. But that's a really good way to talk about what people need as well as in a situation. So if there's a dilemma, if there's challenges in a child's relationships with their friends, talking to them about the needs and wants that they have as well as their friends have. So being explicit about talking about those things is really helpful. So with this, a lot of research over the course of history and psychology has focused a lot on negative. So like abnormal psychology started because there's these disorders, we see these symptoms, we see these problems. A lot of social psychology focus on like, why do groups do bad things? Why do people do bad things? So a lot of research starts with those kinds of questions of do we have these problems? Why are these bad things happening? Why do people hurt each other? Those kinds of things. And those are all completely, absolutely valuable and valid questions. Positive psychology takes another, like kind of flips that, says, okay, we know a lot about these things and we have a lot of good methods and ways to study things. Let's use those same methods to study some of the positive aspects of human development, whether it be moral development, whether it be positive institutions. Let's look at some of the positive things that people can do to thrive and use those same methods to focus on helping people thrive. And what we find, just like we talked about with resilience, when we work on building people's resilience, a lot of those negative kind of outcomes decrease. A lot of these positive things and training these positive things are a protective factor for some of those negative things. So the last thing I want to emphasize is all those different dimensions are what make up people's moral behavior. So the reasoning, things like that. Kohlberg really emphasized that we would reason in any given situation. So when a moral situation comes up, we would reason about it, maybe even really quickly, figure out what we would do right then and there. What we found with neurological studies and interviews, experiments, a lot of research just shows that most of our behavior, moral or pro-social or not, is mostly habitual, essentially based on these things, our values, our previous decisions, our previous reasonings. We kind of pre-program ourselves, so when we encounter a new situation, we will kind of run on autopilot. Our neural network already knows who we are and what we will do. So with that, after a situation, you might sit back and say, oh, maybe I should have done X, Y, or Z. That might have been better, and that might now be incorporated into your moral behavior in the future. But a lot of our moral behaviors isn't reasoned out in the moment. It's habitual, it's instinctual, you might say, based on our previous life and our previous behavior. So that's one big thing in moral development that moves us away from what Kohlberg was talking about, especially, is seeing that, yes, you can definitely intervene, manipulate, and change and help people be more pro-social over time. And what you're doing there is kind of building new habits. So that's a big part of moral development. So that is, so an example, is your habit to hold the door for people, or is it not? If it's not your habit, you're probably not going to do that the next time that happens. If it is your habit, you're probably going to do it. If there's a new similar kind of situation, you probably won't reason about it in that situation. You'll use these previous values, emotions, and previous habit behaviors and do something more instinctual. So hopefully you can see all these little aspects coming together within these systems for moral development. This is probably our last big discussion about moral development. We'll talk about moral identity another time. And then next time we come back to class, we'll start on socio-emotional gender differences and focus on families and peer relations in socio-emotional development. Yeah, all right. So thanks for being here today, and we will definitely also have time to go over the study guide. In between now and Thursday, though, send me emails with questions on the study guide that you are really unclear on or something like that, so that I can focus on those first thing when we talk about the study guide on Thursday. So have a great rest of your day, and thanks for being here.